Welcome to Career Conversations, and I'm Richard Wether, and we're happy to have many of you here and watching this. I'm going to hand it off to Lori Scharf. Lori, good afternoon. Welcome, and thank you.
Thank you, Richard. And thank you for attending Career Conversations. Joining us today is Ron Brooks, CEO and founder of Accessible Avenue. Before Ron started Accessible Avenue, he has worked in the transportation realm for about 30 years. And he has worked in both with fixed route and paratransit services. Ron, why don't you begin by telling us a little bit about your visual impairment and also a little about how you became involved in transportation?
Oh, I'm happy to do it. Hi, Lori. It's nice to be with you. I've known you for quite some time as well, and it's a pleasure to come on your podcast and just talk a little bit about my career and kind of how we got to where we are. So I am Ron Brooks. I currently live in Phoenix, Arizona, with my wife, Lisa. We have 3 kids. We live in a nice house with a couple of dogs, including one of which is my seeing eye dog. And we're super happy to be here. So I will start with the fact that I was born, I'm 55 now, and so I was born in the late 60s, and I was born with congenital glaucoma. So at that time, that was pretty much when you were born with a congenital glaucoma, you probably were going to be significantly visually impaired or blind. I was actually born completely blind, and my parents were very much, we were a working class family in a working class town. They were pretty practical folks. And when the doctors at whatever hospital told them, hey, your son has glaucoma, we have an experimental treatment that might be able to, and I believe it was some sort of a glaucoma eye pressure kind of thing. We might be able to like restore some of his vision, but it's risky. It's pretty new. My parents said, hey, why don't you do one and let's save the other one just in case it doesn't work. So that seemed like pretty practical advice. So that I had a surgery and I did actually gain the use of my eyesight in one eye for most of my childhood. So I spent my time as a typical kid of the 1970s, riding my bike, playing baseball, kickball, running around outside. And I loved to play basketball. And that was my favorite. I'm from Indiana. That's what everybody in Indiana does. So I was playing basketball. I was 14. My eyesight by this point was pretty terrible. I could see a little, but not much. And I was playing a very dangerous version of basketball that involves a lot of contact. Basically, it's neighborhood scrum. It's like rugby with a basketball. And I took a shot to the face, and that was not good for my eyesight. I lost the residual eyesight that I had in about a 12-hour period and had to immediately pivot and learn to be a blind person. So I was taught Braille and Hurry. This is the beginning of my freshman year in high school. That first year was pretty bad. Didn't get a whole lot done, but I did learn how to do Braille. And my parents chose to move from the small town we were living in to a larger city. And I continued in high school and got through, and each year got a little bit better than the year before. And I graduated and went to college. And during my time in college, I was interested in political science, U.S. government history, all that kind of stuff. I thought I was either going to work for the U.S. Agency for International Development or the Foreign Service Bureau or something like that, or I'd be a college professor. So I took a couple classes in education. I didn't like that very much, and I found myself not really enjoying the prospects of getting into the U.S. foreign services or anything like that. As a blind person, I didn't think I would be able to get in. So I decided to go to graduate school and continue trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. Meanwhile, I had learned how to use public transit, and I found the experience of public transportation to be very difficult. I lived in Indianapolis at this point. I was finishing up my undergraduate at Indiana University on the campus of IUPUI in Indianapolis. I lived in an apartment. I did a lot of walking. I took public transit. It's now about 1989, 1990, and transportation was hard. The buses were terrible. They didn't run very often. At that point, there were no requirements for drivers to call stops, so I was routinely dropped off in the wrong place and had to walk a little extra. So and Indiana was cold in the winter, so when transit didn't work right, it was pretty cold. So anyway, I went to graduate school in San Francisco. I was going to study international relations, and they had really good transit. Relatively speaking, we had buses, we had trains, we had BART, which is a kind of a subway system. We even had ferries, ferry boats that crossed the bay, and we could use those. So we had a lot of public transportation, but it had a lot of the same challenges. Buses were often late. They were crowded. The drivers weren't very friendly. They didn't usually or often call stops. So again, it was just a really difficult system as a blind person to use. So I had the opportunity to attend a meeting of an advisory committee for BART, which was the local subway system. And I love trains. I mean, I liked transportation. I was fascinated by movement anyway. So I was a member of a consumer advisory, consumer group of ACB, as a matter of fact. And the local chapter that I was in was looking for somebody to go represent them at this meeting of this advisory group, because BART was proposing changes to discount fares and some other things, and the community was concerned. And for me, I was just curious, and they had free cookies and such, and I was a graduate student, so I was always hungry. So I decided to go to this meeting, and I loved what I heard. And I also noticed that people in the community and the staff for the agency were often talking past each other and not really hearing each other. The community was angry, and so they weren't really hearing what staff had to say, and staff wasn't really understanding where the community was coming from, because they're not disabled people. They certainly had no understanding what it's like to live that way. And I sort of felt like if people could listen and look for compromise, there were easy solutions, or at least they seemed easy to me. There were compromises that could be made that would create win-win. And it seemed to me that these people should just listen to each other. So I found myself getting involved and giving people ideas, and people liked what I had to say. And a position came open at BART right about at the same time that I was running out of money and running out of interest in my degree program. And I decided to work in the transit industry. And that was 30 years ago. And since that time, I've done pretty much everything there is to do in accessible public transportation and paratransit. And paratransit at that time, which is now a pretty big part of my career, it largely didn't exist in the agency that I worked at. And it was pretty rudimentary. The ADA had just been passed by this point. And so the entire industry was trying to learn how to do this thing called paratransit. And so I got to work in that, and the rest, there's a whole lot of history between now and then, but that's really how I got started in transit.
Fabulous. So you don't actually have like educational experience in transit, but you do have college experience. Would you think that somebody entering the field of transit might look at some sort of degree area associated with transit, like looking back?
Yeah, absolutely. So keep in mind, I entered the industry in 1993. So
in its infancy.
in its infancy, and also at a time, the industry wasn't in its infancy. It'd been around for 100 years at this point, but certainly accessible transit was new. First off, I think the most valuable asset that I brought with me is something that almost anybody listening to this podcast or watching it might theoretically bring with them, and that's life experience. We don't understand how powerful our own experience is as a teacher for us, and this is certainly true in transportation. I can certainly speak to, and all of you can speak to, your own experiences as blind or low vision travelers, to the challenges that you have, to the way things either work or don't work, and to ways that they would work better or potentially work better. You have that with or without schooling. What schooling provides, there's a couple of things. It provides credibility because a lot of people don't understand the value of lived experience. The other thing it brings is the ability to have discipline in your thinking, and in how you approach research and problem solving, and also marketing of your ideas. So what schooling gave me, and I'm going to get into specific degree programs in just a second, but from a general standpoint, I think schooling is important because it teaches you to think. It teaches you to use structure in how you solve problems, and it teaches you to market and explain your ideas to other people, and it gives you credibility. And those are things that life experience, unfortunately, doesn't always provide. As far as degree programs, I had a degree in liberal arts, which is basically a degree that allows you to be fairly well informed about everything, but not super expert in anything. And it allows you to be very popular at parties and playing trivia games. I do not recommend it for, if you're serious about transit. I would think about a planning degree. I would think about urban planning. I would think about maybe even business administration if you're thinking about leadership. I would think about certain types of science if you're interested in technology, whether it's computer science or applied, some kind of applied technology approach. I don't know all those those courses of study as well, but I would be looking for degree programs that build skills that are relevant to public transit. So, and I think when you're thinking about that, those are the kind of questions where you can, and something I did not do, because again, I kind of came at this from, I'm an advocate, I have anger issues, I want to solve problems. I wasn't thinking about like a strategic approach into the industry. Were I thinking about it today, I'd probably sit down with some people in the industry and ask them a lot of questions. I might look for some internship opportunities. I would approach this a little bit different. So if you're thinking about it for yourself, I'd probably start with, maybe I should talk to some people that are in the industry and get their perspective.
Great. So nobody's career goes smoothly, and I'm sure you've faced some obstacles along the way. I'm wondering if you can think of a particular obstacle that you may have come across in your career and how you worked on resolving that issue.
Sure. So there have been several. Some of them I think are blindness related, and some of them I think are just the kind of things that people in general have to overcome and manage. And I also think that I did a few things right, either by luck or by intuition or just by the fact of how my parents raised me, which was to kind of figure stuff out on your own and just deal. So I'm going to give you a little bit of both of those things. So as far as overcoming, I think one of the big challenges that we all have to figure out how to manage is how do we deal with our blindness in the workplace? Of course, that comes up to everything from how do you disclose your blindness in an application process, to how do you deal with technology that you might need, or if you're not even sure, to how are you accepted by your coworkers, and how do you advance in the industry when there's a lot of unwritten rules that make it hard to advance in the industry, and especially if you are a person who's blind or has low vision. For example, there is a culture within the public transit industry that likes to promote from within. And there's a very big kind of moral bias in favor of people who started at the ground level. Well, the ground level in public transit is driving a bus or fixing buses. So those are pretty tough career. That's a hard place for a blind person to start their career.
As a driver, yes.
Yeah, well, even as a mechanic, because
Yeah.
everything's computerized now, and and there's work orders, and there's a lot of, and there's bias. There's safety protocols. There's all these things, driver's license requirements, et cetera, et cetera. So those are hard. I think the best thing that I was able to do was I did not apply for my first job. So the first job I ever got, I got because somebody wanted to hire me because they saw my work as a volunteer. And I'm not a big advocate for spending all your time volunteering on stuff, because at some point you got to pay the bills. And I think blind people are often taken advantage of by all these people who want us to do free internship after free internship after free internship. And I didn't have the patience or the money to do that kind of stuff. I got lucky. Somebody knew me. They saw my work as a volunteer, and they gave me a job opportunity. If you can network, network. If you can find ways to network, that is a super important thing to do, and that's true in transportation and just about anywhere else. As far as disclosing disability, I avoided disclosing it until I absolutely had to. I always sort of wanted to have them as far onto the hook as I could before the blindness card came out and got played, because I always sort of figured they might try to find a way to weasel out. So I made it as hard and as uncomfortable as I possibly could. And of course, I also tried really hard to know my subject and interview well and do all those things, so that it just made it that much harder for them to say no. I would say the biggest challenges that I faced in my career were advancement. So there's a lot of unwritten rules in a workplace, and there's a lot of relationships that have to work right, and there's a lot of subtle kinds of things that happen that allow people to be promoted, and being blind made those things hard, especially earlier in my career. Was really hard to get past some of those because people had their biases, and I would never get the chance. I remember early in my career speaking at events, and I'd be lined up with two other speakers on a panel, and because I was becoming an expert in paratransit early on, and when there weren't that many experts, and I would get chances to speak, and we would have presentations at conferences, and there might be three of us on a panel, and after the panel's over, I'm standing there with the other panelists, and people are coming up and they're asking the panelists to my left about how they figured out this issue, and they're congratulating the panelists to my right about how great their presentation was. And they come up to me and ask me, how do I know when my doggy has to go to the bathroom? And those kinds of things were really hard to take at first. And I had to learn to swallow a lot of bile around the unfairness of how I felt I was being treated. Over time, I persisted, I kept speaking anyway. And I would also tell people how I felt. I mean, I wouldn't tell the person who did it, but I would tell my friends and my colleagues and my bosses and say how unfair this is. And these are people who were generally in my corner. I mean, they hired me. So I would start to build understanding with the people around me of how wrong these things were, and how we could be better than that. And little by little, I found that became less of an issue. And today it's not a big issue. It does come up sometimes, and there are times when I feel sad because I feel excluded. Even to this day, 30 years in, and I have a good reputation and all that, there are still times, and there are still occasions when I'm by myself and nobody else is. And so it's still there, but I've learned how to manage it, and I've also learned that I can't control it, and it's better to put your efforts into stuff you can control and not waste so much energy on things that you probably aren't going to be able to change. The other thing I wanted to talk about is during the pandemic, I got fired, and And I got fired for economic reasons. I was working for a company that was trying to do something new that I really aligned with. And that was to build an on-demand kind of approach to delivering paratransit so people wouldn't have to call ahead, a day in advance and all that kind of stuff, which I think is silly nowadays. And the company that had hired me to be their national business development vice president. I was going to build their business from the ground up, and I was going to get paid a pretty nice chunk of money to do it. And then that happened, and then the pandemic happened about 8 months after I started, or a little less than that, actually, about 6 months after I started, and everything stopped. And after about a year of just taking pay cuts so we could survive and watching other people get laid off, they came to me with a nice severance and told me to go away. That was hard. And what I learned from that, and that happens to everybody. I mean, that was not a blindness thing. That wasn't, them singling me out and being mean to me. That was the time we were living in. A lot of people that I know who are people in the industry were, similarly treated. And what I did with that opportunity was, I decided to pivot. I'd been talking about starting my own business forever. I now had a severance, which meant I had a little bit of time. It was time to start that consulting company that I'd always talked about starting, but never quite had the nerve to do. Well, now I had a reason to, and I had a time clock that was ticking, i.e. my severance. It was going to run out. So I started working on my company, and I worked hard, and I had taken some training and about kind of how to work through starting a business and how to use your time wisely and all that kind of stuff. And so I got busy, and it's been hard. I mean, it's been financially difficult, and I took, it's a huge pay cut. Let me tell you, I don't pay myself nearly as well as those other people paid me. Um, I can't
I
afford
can
myself,
relate.
but it's what we had to do, and it's been very rewarding. And it's led to other opportunities. And right now I have a part-time job because I need benefits that I couldn't afford to pay myself through my own business. So I took another job as a part-time, some part to full-time, basically, with a company called UZURV. And ironically, the thing that I set out to do at the beginning of the pandemic that I got fired before I could do is exactly the thing I'm doing for a better company. And I'm not, the money's not quite the same because, I mean, that other offer was probably a little bit unrealistic. Um, but it's enough. And I love what I do. And that opportunity came to me because I immediately put my company back out there and got busy and got very, very visible in the industry. And they saw me and came to me, and now they're a big part of my work and my future and of the money that's in our bank account. So sometimes bad things happen and you can turn them to your advantage, but you have to be willing to do it. It's a lot of work.
Yes. Yeah, great segue.
Mhm.
You travel a lot for work, and this is
Mhm.
going to be my last question for you, and then we're going to turn it over to my colleagues, Richard and Lee and Alaya, if they have any questions, and then also to the audience. So
Mhm.
feel free to type into the chat, and we will take questions from the chat first. So you travel a lot for work as a person who's blind or low vision,
Mhm.
and I'm curious in, a minute or two, if you could just describe how you, um, you frequently, you're not the type of person to go and sit in the hotel and hang out. So how do you stay comfortable in those settings, and what are some things that you do to make yourself visible when you're traveling for conferences like that?
So travel's hard. I'll say right up front, travel is hard. It takes some energy. It takes a little bit of effort. It also takes a pretty good sense of humor, and it also takes some apps. So um, So I would say, first off, and I also have a guide dog, which means it also takes paperwork and planning, and a good bit of patience. So, I think the first part is recognizing that it takes effort, and that it's probably going to be occasionally not ideal. So knowing, for example, that when you go to the airport, having a plan is pretty important, and knowing that your plan may not work the way you want, and having backup ideas in mind. So, for example, I will go to an airport, and I may plan to go to my gate with no assistance. But then the gate changes or something else happens, and I may need to get assistance, and I need to be prepared to handle that. A lot of it is just being prepared to ignore or let the comments that other people sometimes make, or that people that are providing assistance make, let that roll off your back, and not spend energy on getting annoyed because people do things that are annoying, not trying to fight every battle. Those are things I've learned later, because I think they take maturity, and sometimes I don't have it. With regard to the travel itself, and like getting out, I use a lot of apps. I have a pretty good sense of direction anyway, and I'm also curious. I like to learn things. I like to try things, and I like to not be trapped in my room. Now I do spend a lot of time in my hotel room. I'm not going to lie. I like to read and do other things, but I do like to get out. I don't like to eat room service, so I will use apps. Mostly, I would say apps like Ira, and there are other products like Be My Eyes that can also work. But I will use apps to find places to go, or I'll check with the concierge and find places to go that I want to go to. I will use map apps to try to find them. I will use Ira or Be My Eyes or something like it when I don't find it. I'll use Uber Eats if they don't have a Braille menu, to see if I can find an online menu that I can read. All that kind of stuff. I do use TNCs, the Ubers and Lyfts of the world, recognizing that sometimes they don't work right because I have a guide dog. So a lot of it's just apps, and a sense of adventure, and and a willingness to go out and just try. And I am very willing to get assistance if I need to get assistance. I am not shy about stopping anybody on the street and just saying, "Hey, I had a question." And it's hit or miss. Sometimes people
Oh
are
yeah.
helpful, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they speak English, and sometimes they don't. So you take the good with the bad. And I have been in some very strange situations because of mistakes in navigation. You just have to have a sense of humor. I was on the train tracks of a Minneapolis light rail train without realizing it. And once I realized
Oh,
that I was in peril, people helped me climb onto a platform. It's a long story, but the bottom line is stuff happens, and you just have to be prepared to deal and have a sense of humor, and don't always try it at home. So
don't know. Yeah, that's true. Great. Well, Richard, Lee, Alaya, I'm going to turn it to you guys first, and feel free to type in the chat, and other participants, and we'll read out the questions as we go along. And I do have some other questions as well. So, but it's time to start asking the additional questions. Go ahead, Richard and Lee and Alaya.
Lee or Laya, do you have any questions?
Yeah, hi, Ron. It's Lee Huffman. I have a question for you. You had mentioned about the importance of making a plan before you travel. And you'd also mentioned that you use different apps. Could you walk us through what you do to actually make a plan? What things do you consider when you're going to be traveling? What things do you put into that plan before you go?
Okay, so when I say make a plan, I want to tell you, it is not like some people plan to a very high level of detail. My plan is pretty is a little bit more basic than that. It might just be, okay, Monday night looks like a free night in the conference because the conference is, starts on Tuesday, and it's kind of light on Monday night. So I'm going to go to dinner Monday night. My plan might be, okay, finding the local, the 3 or 4 restaurants that look interesting that are local. Maybe looking at their menus to see which one, might be the easiest or the best or the thing that most resonates. I'm then probably going to try to figure out, what does the walking path look like in terms of distance? And that's probably the plan. And it might also include, I mean, some of this now is a little easier, but I might look to see, okay, if it's in a city where I think I can use transit, I might, try to figure out what the transit route looks like. At a very minimum now, I'm going to make sure that it's in an area where I think I can get get like a ride share, like a Lyft or whatever. Nowadays, that's almost to the point where you don't have to plan it because those services are virtually everywhere. But there have been times when I've been in cities where Lyft wasn't available or Uber wasn't. And I'll give you a recent example. I was just at a conference in Bloomington, Illinois, and I mean, it's a college town. I flew in, landed at the airport at 10 o'clock at night. There was no ride share. There were no taxis. There was no nothing. And I couldn't comprehend the backwardness of a place that didn't have these things that just seemed so obvious to me living in Phoenix. And, but they didn't. And being who I am, I started asking around at the airport, talking to strangers, and some guy came up and said, "Hey, I run a rideshare company. It's my own car. I'll give you a lift for $20." And I'm thinking, well, you have a business card, which I scanned with Seeing AI to make sure it looked like a legitimate business card. And I thought, well, if you're a murderer, you've gone to an awful lot of trouble. So I'm going to take a risk. So you do have to have a little bit of a tolerance for risk. And I actually have game scenarioed in my head, like if I think I'm with a serial killer, what will I do first? And unfortunately, I've never had to test the accuracy of any of this work, but I have thought about it. So, because you just never know.
That's all good advice. One thing I was kind of getting at when I was asking the question is, do you plan ahead for like a meet and greet at the airports? Do you make that in your itinerary, check the box for a passenger who has a disability so that the airlines folks will know in advance to maybe watch out for you?
I did not use
expecting you, things like that.
Yeah, got it. I didn't used to. I never did because I didn't want them to make assumptions about what my needs might be. And I didn't, part of that was if I didn't think I needed them, I wouldn't ask. However, now that because I travel with a guide dog and the rules have changed, now I don't have a choice. I have to disclose that I'm traveling with a service animal. So I am required to make that acknowledgement. I typically do not disclose disability unless I have a very compelling reason to do so, because I just figure most people are so busy drawing conclusions that by the time I get there, I'm going to have to re-educate. And I'd rather just tell them at the time that I need assistance if I truly need it.
All right. Thank you. Thanks.
Ron, I do have a question, but I'll save it for the end when I put my rehabilitation counselor hat on. But Alaya, I think we've got 2 or 3 questions in the chat.
Yes, there are a few questions. The first question is from Ashley, and she is asking, have you known Braille all of your life? If not, how long? Did you use a Braille embosser or electronic Braille? If electronic Braille, what Braille display?
Okay, so I learned Braille when I was 14. I started to kind of learn it a little bit in like 5th grade, but I didn't really need it yet, so I didn't try very hard. When I turned 14 and lost my eyesight in one day, then I got real serious and learned Braille pretty quick. And I am not a Braille first reader, so my preference is audio or electronic, but I do read Braille. And I actually use Braille every single time I make a presentation to the public, which is often. And I actually produce those on paper using a Perkins Braille writer because I'm a pretty kinesthetic learner. So I like to pound it out myself. I do have a Braille embosser. I don't actually know how to get the thing to work. In fact, I just talked to somebody last week about getting some training so I can figure it out. But I've tried refreshable Braille. I don't love refreshable Braille. And it's not so much the feel of the Braille as it is just, I always feel like I'd like to be able to more quickly see the whole document. And I just don't, I'm happier with paper. So
I love
hope that
hearing
answers.
that as somebody that's a person who does similarly like to see the layout. It's easier, I think, to skip around.
Yeah. That and we're showing our age, but anyway.
That's true. We are.
Okay. Next question.
There's nothing wrong with that. Okay, this one is asking, do you use GPS apps? Is that on an iPhone or standalone product? Do any blind-friendly GPS apps tell you what things are around, such as stores and restaurants, or just the streets?
So that's a good question. There's a lot of them. So I do use a lot of GPS apps on the iPhone, and I was at a trade show in the disability community. I was actually at the NFB conference in Florida last week representing UZURV, and I was my booth was next to folks that were selling a product that was freestanding, and I really was I kind of liked it, but it was pretty expensive, and so I was like, well, maybe not. But anyway, I just use what's on my phone for the most part. I have found that I'm still, yeah, I do a lot of work with some of the companies that do wayfinding technologies, and it's part of my business is to kind of help them with like looking at transit. And most of my experience with the ones that I've been working with, they're a little bit more on the GPS side of things. They're not so much into like I'm thinking of the app Around Me, and I don't know that that's blindness specific, but it does provide kind of that, these are the stores that are closest or the restaurants. I find those apps to be helpful to know kind of what things are around, but then if I want to actually find those things, I'll actually go to another app like Google Maps or something else to try to actually go find them. I'm starting to use Seeing AI. If I know where I'm going and I just need something to help me read signs, I will just open up Seeing AI and hold it up and just start walking, and it'll start picking up signs. And it's kind of hit or miss, but it can work pretty well sometimes. So I'd say I don't have a perfect solution around this yet. And then if I really get toasted, I can't figure my way out of it. I just call Ira at that point. So.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm.
Oh, go ahead, Richard.
I just saw the question. I love this. I'm excited to see how Ron's going to respond to this next question. Go ahead and read it, Alex. I'm going to chop it up here.
Okay. Well, there's a couple questions probably before that one. This one is, do you find that transit websites are generally accessible?
That's the one.
Oh, okay.
I generally find that they are not accessible. They are not well designed. I am extremely excited about there was just closed a comment period on a web and mobile app accessibility standard for the U.S. Department of Justice and the U.S. Department of Transportation that applies to state and local governments. And if and when that thing is adopted, I can't wait to see the mayhem that is unleashed in the transit industry, because some agencies do better than others, but by and large, we could all be doing quite a bit better. And I will tell you, I've seen transit agencies, including one that I worked for, release a mobile app into the wild that was 100% not accessible. TARC did it too, but we come to expect these things. But honestly, it's just it appalls me that we're still having these discussions this far into the web, to the life cycle of the internet and accessibility. It's just ridiculous.
I agree.
Okay. And then another question is, when using things like GPS apps, do you wear a headset of any kind?
Generally, I wear a headset if I'm around other people. Earbuds usually, very basic. I've played around with bone conducting and I just haven't found a product I really like. But I do wear earbuds if I'm in a particularly loud environment where I won't be able to hear my phone, or if I'm around other people and I don't want them to hear my phone, which I always think is a little weird when you're walking around, and especially like at blind conventions, there's like 73 people with their phones going off at once. I never quite understood the culture that allows us to do that. But anyway, I try to keep it down. So yeah.
I wanted to add to one of the questions that Lori hadn't gotten to you yet. So thank you,
Mhm.
Lori, for letting me ask it. But when I was a rehabilitation counselor, Ron, I often work with folks who were eager to get a job until you asked them, are you willing to move? In your span of your career, you've moved quite a bit. What went into thinking about, okay, I need to move for a job. Am I, is this going to be worth it? I'm going to move from here to here to here. What was going through your mind at that time? Were you resistant? Were you just going to roll the dice and take a chance? Again, I worked with many consumers who were not willing to move and kind of dodge a lot of good job opportunities that way.
Three things, maybe four: money, power, curiosity, and boredom. So I am some people are averse to change. I am at the other end of the spectrum. I get bored when things don't change. I like to try new stuff. I like to go to new places. I like to earn more money than I'm earning today. So usually my reasons for moving would be, I mean, the perfect scenario was a job with more responsibility that paid better, in a place preferably with nice weather, that I'd not been to. And I grew up moving as a kid. We were poor. Our family was very much working class or below, and we moved all the time. So I think sometimes we probably moved because we were forced to move, but I got used to moving, so moving never bothered me. And so, and as a career person wanting to advance in my career, I was never concerned about moving if it could help my career. I mean, the biggest challenges we had were were reasons not to move, like kids, schools, things like that. And my moving slowed down once our family came. So once we got to Phoenix in 2006, our kids were just starting school. We made a decision at that point that we would not move again out of Phoenix, until such time as our kids were out of school. And we've not. We've been here for 17 years. Our youngest is now a senior in high school, and we are now thinking, okay, it might be time to think about moving again, but not until then.
Yeah. Good. Thanks.
Hey, there's another question here. Can you or any panelists recommend a lightweight double-sided embosser? I use Braille for presentations too. When you plan ahead for travel, do you write notes down about the route and how? I would guess you would need to do it as it is a bunch to remember.
I actually don't typically write things down for routes. Typically what I do, if I need to, I'll put it in the notes app in my phone. I typically don't travel with the ability to produce Braille. So I don't have a recommendation about a lightweight Braille embosser that I would carry. I'm too busy carrying dog food to make room in my suitcase for much else.
Yep.
So the brailing that I do, I try to prepare ahead of time for like presentations and things like that. When I'm traveling, I have a really good memory. I've been very fortunate to develop my memory, and it's pretty good. And anything I don't think I can remember, I use the apps. I use the Notes app. The other thing I'll say is with GPS, typically, if you are using a step-by-step direction, your phone will advise you as you go. So you don't really need to have too much committed to memory in order to run a route.
Hey, another question. Can you explain the difference between GPS and wayfinding apps in the type of info you can access with each?
That's a good question. And to me, a GPS app is simply an app that uses GPS functionality, which is basically maps that are available from satellites that orbit around Earth. So a GPS app just means simply that the app is interacting, with satellite to determine where you are and maybe where something else is, and drawing. Excuse me. In the case of like the Maps app, it might be, giving you directions between the 2 points. To me, wayfinding, it's similar, but wayfinding incorporates more elements than just map. So a GPS is just a map. The wayfinding app might also include things like signage information. It might include things like building names. It might include, so it's just a little bit more detailed. It may also include indoor navigation, so which is typically not available with GPS because GPS is not available indoors typically. So I'd say wayfinding is a little bit more robust, and it's a little bit more focused on how to complete a specific route and to know where you are along that route as you are running it. In the blind low vision community, we typically think of wayfinding apps as being fairly specific to our needs. They typically are tied to either, they could be tied to GPS, but they could also be tied to QR codes. There are apps that you can print out QR codes and label things with them, and the wayfinding app will basically intercept those QR codes and tell you what they say, and you can navigate between them. There are apps that use beacons kind of in a similar way, which is a different kind of technology. There are some that use the gyroscope and the accelerometer in your phone to determine where you are and how far you've gone. So it's really a little bit of a different kind of emphasis.
Ron, let me ask you one of my last questions is, do you know yourself many blind or low vision folks in the industry that you're in, transportation, transit?
Yeah, there actually are a few. There used to be one, and it was me that I knew of. And I do know now of several people, including a couple of people that are in management roles. None to, there was one CEO of a transit agency, but he actually came from a sighted background and a politician. So he was sighted, a sighted guy who lost his eyesight later in life, who also happened to be in politics, and he became a CEO of a transit agency. And interestingly, he got fired for reasons that were the kind of reasons that transit execs occasionally get fired for. It wasn't like it was his blindness.
Sure.
But what was really interesting is he never got another job in the industry. And that's very unusual.
Stayed with the job that he was in.
I'm sorry.
He stayed with the job that he was within, like that.
No, he got fired. And once he got fired, he couldn't get another job. And
oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
So that's very unusual for CEOs in our industry. They usually become consultants or they get hired by somebody else.
Right.
And those things didn't happen for him. The other people I know are at lower levels. I mean, there's a couple of that are at like a manager/director level. But for the most people, blind people in the transit industry don't advance beyond maybe a supervisor level or a call center level. Call center jobs are fairly common. There are people that they'll get a little bit higher than that, but there are very few of us. I mean, I was not going to ever get hired as a transit CEO, and I wanted to be one, and I saw the writing on the wall, and I suffered with this. I mean, I felt very mistreated by my industry when all my peers were getting hired as CEOs and making a lot of money, and I couldn't get an interview. I finally just reconciled myself to the fact that was not going to be a path I was going to get on, and I needed to stop just being angry about it and do something different. And so I made myself a CEO of my own company, and that took care of it. So, but yeah, it's really there's we're changing, but there's still some prejudice in the industry. It's not an easy way in.
Would you say for any industry where many folks who are blind or low vision, who are obviously in the minority, and that's in most industries, but transportation is high among them, networking, reaching out to folks would be helpful as an incentive to really kind of learn how they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah, I think it's essential. I don't think I would have started my career in transit had I not been networked at least a little, and been given a chance. I would never have gotten my first job out of the want ads. I would never have gotten my job from the Department of Rehab setting up an interview. Yeah, it just wouldn't have happened. I had to have somebody give me a chance, and that is just a fact. It might be a little bit better now. I don't know. I'm a little skeptical because I see a lot of people. I mean, I do think you can get an entry-level job in transit now by applying. I do think that's possible, but I don't think those jobs typically promote, and the people who get them tend to not move very far.
Sure.
So
this has been a great. Yeah, I was going to ask you, Lori and Lee, if you had any wrap-up questions.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, do you have any mentors either within your industry or maybe people that were blind or low vision that mentored you and helped you along your career journey?
I mean, I certainly have mentors who are not blind in the industry. There's no one in the industry who was a mentor. I think I was probably one of the first. I'm thinking about now outside, just people that I've learned from who are blind, who I respect. And yeah, I'm thinking about that. And I want to give you an honest answer, not a political answer. And I honestly am not thinking if I can think of lots of people that have characteristics that I wish I had, that are more patient than I am, that are more diplomatic than I am, that are, more careful than I am. But I can't think of anybody who from a career standpoint really served as a mentor in our community. And I think that's a function of age to some degree. I think that we as a community, I mean, there aren't that many of us when I was, we all went to college, but a lot of us didn't get very good jobs coming out of college. And I think that I did not do a good job of looking, because I think those people are out there. But I think I didn't try to find them. Once I got into my career, I focused all of my mentorship efforts inside my career, and those were not blind people. So I didn't build great relationships outside. Yeah.
So you did find professional mentors within your field,
but not blind folks. Just professional. Yes.
Yeah. I do know that you're very well respected. Having come from New York originally, I can tell you that I have met people within the industry in different settings, and very often your name comes up. And
that, I mean, I know that's true now. That took a long time. 30 years is a long time. So what I would say to people now, if I were giving advice, one is build relationships within the blind community with people that you respect, and build relationships inside your industry with people that you respect, who can teach you and learn. Because those relationships really, really helped me. And I still have people that I talk to inside my industry that I get advice from and that I ask for help. And those are priceless relationships, because we are not on an island. By the way, I am thinking and talking to some people now about creating a group within our professional trade association that's focused around disability, because there is not one that it currently exists in the entirety of the industry, to my knowledge. And excuse me. And I would like to see us have one, because I think there are young people coming up who are going to need support and help and guidance and coaching and friendship. And there isn't a group. And
hey,
I think
Ron,
we need a group.
2 quick questions. One from the chat. Do you have any tips on networking? And if folks want to connect with you publicly, do you have a LinkedIn profile?
I do have a LinkedIn profile, and I'll make sure if Lori doesn't have it, that somebody over there gets it, and you can drop it in whatever show notes you have. And I would invite you to follow my profile. And if you want to connect, all I ask is, if you want to connect, explain the reason, because I do screen connections because they add to my feed.
So for those watching this
yeah.
video recorded, they could look you up under Ron Brooks Accessible Avenue on LinkedIn, or
Oh yeah, you should be able to find me, and you can follow either my own. You can either follow my page or you can follow my company's page. I tend to post more on my own page, but then I share good content to the company page. So you can find me either way, and you're welcome to do so. And what was your other question?
Quick tips on networking.
LinkedIn. Start there. And that's before you're in a career. If you are interested in a particular career, start finding associations and organizations to follow on LinkedIn. Read people's posts and comment on those posts and start building your own network.
Yeah.
Take it seriously. And then within your industry, go to every training and conference that they'll pay for you to go to. Meet as many people as you can, make friends, and volunteer. I will tell you, when I was at BART at the beginning of my career, if my boss asked us if for volunteers, I always volunteered, always, because I figured no matter what it was, it would help me make a case for a raise, or it would teach me something, or it would give me chances to meet other people.
Initiative is key.
Yeah.
Ron,
Yes.
it's been a pleasure. Lori, thanks
Mhm.
so much. We appreciate you being on Career Conversations and impacting many, many lives. Well, listening to this now and in the future. So it's been a pleasure. Good luck with all your travels and all you do for our community. We need more people like you. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.